small increase for medical cost of temporary detention orders. So very quickly, I won't go in great detail about the Medicaid forecast because this was covered in the annual meeting. But just to highlight that there's a net increase of $255 million. Out of it, this is projected growth now of 7.4% at FY17. This is higher than the 2015 forecast, which only had estimated 3.8% growth. And you can see for 18, it's 4.3% versus the previous forecast, which had it at 2.9%. Enrollment growth in Medicaid was about 2.6% in FY16, and it's continuing at about pretty much the same pace. And the rates for managed care organizations are expected to increase just over 5% in 2018. So if you remember kind of the primary drivers of the forecast, the $255 million, the single largest one is growth in the consumer mental health rehabilitative services, and the other area was basically Medicare premium increases. And that's, the Fed set those rates, when they increase premiums, Medicaid does pay a share of the Medicare premiums for low-income beneficiaries. I would just note there are a few other discretionary items that they funded in Medicaid. $8.5 million is provided to allow personal care workers 16 hours of overtime. As you recall from last session, the General Assembly had capped it that no one would be paid overtime within the consumer-directed personal care program. There's also $5.5 million to fully fund nursing facility inflation. FY18, this was limited to they're only getting half in the current budget, so this would fully fund that. And then there's $1.3 million related to the Medicaid share of same-day access services at CSPs. The Children's Services Act, essentially the primary factor here, you can see an $85.7 million need. It's primarily driven by the growth of private day placement. So these are basically children that through the individualized education planning process within public schools or IAPs, that basically it's, those teams agree that they need to be put in basically a private school to receive their education, and then the CSA program pays for that placement. That is the primary driver in the last few years. The caseload grew by about 4.3% in FY15, and it declined slightly in 16, but the issue is that program expenditures still grew by 6% because the cost per case grew by 6.6%. And that's driven by the fact that a private day placement on average costs about over $38,000 per year versus the typical per cost for the CSA kit for all services is about $23,000. So you can see there was a 5% increase in the number of kids that were placed in private day in FY16. And they also in FY17 had to backfill, provide $13 million to offset the shortfall that occurred in 16 from the higher expenditures. On discretionary spending in HHR, I've already discussed the behavioral health funding package was the largest one. That was about half of all of it. There's also some additional VITA costs in the Department of Social Services. This is to basically some moving parts last year where they were moving money around and trying to capture what is the impact of DSS going off of the Unisys mainframe system, which is used to process eligibility and stuff. That basically there was some, they just really didn't, I think, get the numbers right, so they had to actually put some money in to backfill that. And secondly, they've extended that until I think through the end of February, 2 more months of the Unisys mainframe, so they actually had to add those costs in. Like I said, I already mentioned overtime for personal care workers and nursing home inflation. There's $3.2 million to address special hospitalization costs in mental health hospitals, so this is where people have to go out for medical care in hospitals and pay for that. They've seen increased growth there. There's a few other minor things actually related to bills that will be pending before the General Assembly. In HHR savings, like I said, the primary savings is the health care fund, which is used as state match for Medicaid. This is basically, it has about $26 million in a cash balance that's being brought forward, and the remainder is increased revenue projected from pharmacy rebates off of managed care fundings. You also see a few other strategies. There's a proposed increase of the restaurant inspection fee in the health department. This would increase the fee from $40 to $285, and this is something that's paid annually. Then there's also a few strategies where there's supplanting TANF funds for various non-state agencies that generates about $2.5 million in savings. There's also some funding that was still appropriated for the Northern Virginia Training Center, which is closed. This was kind of money that was reserved for the post-closure costs of the training center, and those costs were less than expected, so we could capture $2.5 million. There's also a small fee associated with the shellfish sanitation program that's operated by the health department, and also that there's also a new fee at the Department of Behavioral Health for those providers licensed for adult services. It's a $500 application fee that makes it consistent with how they do children's providers services. I'll just note a few other things in HHR, other policy funding items. There's a proposal in FY18 to reallocate the Medicaid waiver slots. There are 440 slots already funded. Basically, as the waivers have been redesigned, the thought is that similar to lower cost waivers will have additional services to better serve those people who may have otherwise needed a higher cost waiver, and you can redistribute them. So essentially what they're taking is, they all have new names now, but I've kept the old names because people still identify with them. As the intellectual disability waiver, they would reduce the number of slots by 235 and basically shift those to the developmental disability waiver and what is the day support waiver. And then there's proposed budget language that basically says that it's demonstrated that the overall cost of these slots is lower than budgeted, and they are authorized to actually, the governor's authorized to increase the number of slots to match that level of funding. Also note that there's a proposed transfer at the health department, the summer food service and child and adult care programs to the Department of Education. And lastly, there's also a proposal to use TANF funds to expand access to long-acting reversible contraceptives. This, as you probably remember, was a proposal also this last year. With that, Mr. Chairman, that is overview of HHR.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions for Mike at this time? The fairly detailed, there are questions, lots of questions, because there are a lot of moving parts in this area this year, but we'll address those later, and a lot of amendments. Members have put in over 100 amendments, I understand, in this area.
Yes.
Okay, so we've got a lot of work to do in this area. Thank you, Mike. Sarah?
Yes.
Sarah, you want to
Yes,
share
sir.
K-12?
Picking up on slide 23 with Directed to Education, as Betsy mentioned, 8 localities for schools was exempted from the 5 and 7.5% reductions. But due to technical updates and enrollment projections and other forecast changes, there was general fund reductions reflected in the introduced budget of about $273 million. As you recall, in 2016 session, did add about $850 million general funds with rebenchmarking over the 2 years. And that did include about $50 million in the second year in FY18 to increase the VRS rate in the second year on the teacher side. It had been done beginning in FY17 for the other plans. This slide 23 just summarizes the really just handful of actions proposed in the introduced budget, the technical and forecast changes, which are detailed on the next slide, the $55 million Betsy mentioned for the state share of a 1.5% bonus for the instructional and support positions. The language does not indicate the usual required match or certification of a bonus provided, so there's just general bonus funding provided per the language. There is an increase of about $1 million for an existing teacher residency program and some funding for new summer cyber camps, which were begun with balances last year. Removal of about $400,000 per year for a pilot math science teacher initiative, which is completed its 4th year, and $2 million in savings by deferring the new teacher improvement program that was funded for the first time last year. Just hitting the highlights of a few of these rows at the top of this list of all the technical and forecast updates. This is where you see the savings from the reversal of the planned FY 2017 salary increase. Betsy mentioned both additional non-general funds from lottery proceeds and the literary fund. And these were both included in the October savings plans, now with additional amounts in FY18. On the lottery, most of that is additional FY16 actual proceeds, and so really the new forecast increase is about $5.3 million per year, and you see that in FY18 as well. The increase in the literary fund was primarily due to continued temporary increase from the unclaimed property amounts, as there's been a new policy to sell stocks that have been entered into unclaimed property rather than retaining them in perpetuity as stock. So that going forward would not be at those levels. You see on the fourth row the decrease due to the sales tax projections coming down, the piece that flows through here to schools. On line 5 is savings due to the slowed but still positive growth in student enrollment projections statewide. This reflects now about a 0.25% increase in the first year statewide and about 0.5% increase in enrollment in the second year. And many of those other later actions are also related to enrollment levels in different programs. Mike mentioned the transfer of the federal funds proposed for moving the 2 health food programs to DOE. There are also 2 language programs, language changes proposes to a small special education personnel funding program and funding for Teach for America. Virginia School for Deaf and Blind also was exempted from the reductions, but there is a capital project for main hall exterior proposed and a transfer of funds between programs. Now in the Department of Education Central Office, on slide 26, you see the proposed 5% and 7.5% reductions, eliminating 4 positions in the second year, 2 of which were new last year, and shifting the funding source for 2 to federal funding sources. Reduction in principal and teacher training that had been provided by DOE, 3 reductions to the IT Academy, Kindergarten Readiness Assessment, and eMedia Virginia, as well as some other smaller shifts of funds. There are just 3 new spending items proposed for the department, adding $1.6 million in the second year to fund the instructional improvement system statewide to all school divisions at no cost. This is also known by the current vendor of Power Schools, formerly Interactive Achievement. Second one is to add second year funding for the student growth model. Last year there was $500,000 included in the first year for that, so this provides some funding in the second year, and then $400,000 for the algebra readiness diagnostic test to be provided to all school divisions at no cost. And that completes K-12 education. We've just got one slide here to summarize the other education agencies. On slide 28, they generally did receive the 5 and 7.5% reductions for Jamestown, Yorktown, Museum of Fine Arts, Commission for the Arts, and Frontier Culture, although in the case of the Jamestown, Yorktown, there was an additional targeted reduction of $5.4 million related to the commemorations of the 1619 events. In the case of the Library of Virginia, you may recall they were slated in October to have 15 of the 25 layoffs statewide, so their originally proposed reduction was reduced by about a third. And aid to public libraries was exempted from the targeted calculations and not reduced in either year. And Gunston Hall was exempted from the reductions. That completes my portion.
Okay, questions for Sarah on K-12 or museums? Okay, Sarah, good presentation. You normally talk faster than I think, but I was either thinking faster or you were talking slower this morning, so I kept up with you.
Okay.
Okay, April?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Starting on slide 29 of the overview, and Betsy mentioned some of these items, but the governor's proposed amendments for 16-18 include decreases of about $130 million. Technically, if you look at it, it's about 128. If you include the actions in central appropriations or central accounts, it rises to about $140 million over the biennium. As mentioned earlier, there was a 5% reduction to higher education in the second year of the biennium that excluded financial aid amounts. It's a decrease of 76.1 general funds. However, the proposal exempted both Norfolk State and Virginia State universities, as well as a few other small items. The small items include things like there was new veterans and workforce funding last year at George Mason Community College System, Melchers Monroe Museums under the University of Mary Washington was exempt, and at both the extension agencies at Virginia Tech and Virginia State, the required match for the federal money to get 100% of the federal money was exempted as well. The other item that has also previously been mentioned was that there was a recommended general fund recovery of the amount equal to the non-general fund portion of that prepayment made to the IRS. And that's a decrease of about $40 million over the biennium. Turning to the next slide, It's a 5% across-the-board reduction at most higher ed centers and other agencies for both years. However, Eastern Virginia Medical School was exempted in 17 under the proposal, and their financial aid and indigent care amounts were exempt in 18. That's a decrease over the biennium of $2.6 million. If you're interested in the amounts per agency, if you look at your summary in the higher ed narrative section on page 47, there's a table. And the same for this next bullet as well. At the State Council of Higher Education for Virginia, or SHEV, the proposal included a 5% reduction in the first year and 7.5% in the second year. And that's to all programs except the Virtual Library of Virginia, which all the public colleges and many of the privates participate in to buy library materials. That decrease was 5% each year, and that totals $1.5 million over the biennium. There's an additional reduction to the Higher Education Research Initiative. You might remember there was new funding to that last year of $22 million. The proposal includes a $2 million reduction to those amounts. In central accounts, there was money for research partnerships with ANOVA. There was $8 million in the first year for that item, and the proposal is to reduce it by 50%, a reduction of $4 million. In the last bullet on the page, you might remember this was a Senate initiative to restore the restructuring incentives for the credit card rebate interest earnings, and that's in central appropriations. They proposed removing the entire amount of $8 million over the biennium. And I do want to mention that's also $2 million in non-general funds because the higher ed level 3 institutions hold their own monies, but there is language in Part 3 where the governor is proposing to transfer those amounts back to the state. So, and we'll talk about that further, I'm sure, in the Education Subcommittee. Moving on to some other actions, you might remember the budget had the second year of that big increase in financial aid under SHEV. That's $24.1 million. It was not distributed in the second year, hoping the Joint Subcommittee on the Future Competitiveness of Virginia Higher Education would weigh in. We did weigh in as a Joint Subcommittee. However, with the fact that there would likely be no funding, the recommendation was to leave the allocation the same so there would be no negative between years. And that's what is proposed in the introduced budget. There is language related to procurement and restructuring for the community college system that would allow them to delegate authority from the system to their shared services centers and other community colleges. I will say they weren't entirely happy with the way the language came out in the introduced budget, and I think you'll see several amendments from members related to that language. As far as new spending go, there are very few items. The first of which is there's a proposed $700,000 increase in the second year for projected enrollment growth in the 2-year college transfer grant program. There's an additional $1 million in 17 for higher than anticipated demand for the new economy workforce credential grant. You may remember that was a bill that Senator Ruff carried on the Senate side last year. The third item is a proposed $900,000 increase in the second year for a tuition differential to backfill for out-of-state Virginia National Guard members at Virginia Military Institute. There was legislation related to that that's supposed to be coming from the administration. And I will say, basically how that works is people who are out-of-state students who serve in the Guard would be eligible for in-state tuition under that. However, the only money in the budget is at Virginia Military Institute and not other institutions. And then the last item on the page is just the $12.3 million that is part of that share of that 1.5% bonus, and that's the amount that would be for faculty at the institutions. And Mr. Chairman, if there's no questions, I'll move on to capital outlay. All right. The total actions in capital outlay equal about $431 million over the biennium. There is no general fund cash actions proposed. For tax-supported bonds and the Public Building Authority and College Building Authority, there's about $271 million. In 9C revenue bonds, there's $13.6 million. That's for one dormitory project at the College of William and Mary, and that 9C legislation will come to the committee, so we'll be seeing that bill. Under 9D, there's about $121 million over the biennium. And last, under non-general fund cash, which is mostly matches required for a number of the institution projects, it's $25 million. Moving on to the next page, slightly more detail. For that $271 million, the biggest chunk is for a $105 million project to acquire or construct a new warehouse and administrative offices for the Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control, or ABC. We will be hearing about that proposal in the Capital Outlay Subcommittee on Thursday at 8 a.m. The next item is about $95 million, was done in bonds to supplant general fund from previously authorized projects, and those came from project balances in the planning pool. There's $38 million for 2 new projects and supplements for 6 previously approved projects. About $20 million for furnishings and equipment for projects coming online by the end of fiscal 18. $7 million for infrastructure repairs at behavioral health facilities. $3 million for blanket property acquisition at the Department of Military Affairs, and another $300,000 for renovation of their Roanoke Field Maintenance Shop. $2.5 million for exterior building envelope repairs at the Main Street Center under Department of General Services, and then $1 million in a maintenance reserve supplement for fire safety at Military Affairs. Just a further breakdown of some of those non-general fund amendments, which total about $160 million. As I mentioned earlier, the combined is $135 million for the 9C and 9D revenue bonds. That's for 8 projects total, and the 9C was the 1 project. And then the $25 million in the cash supports another 6 projects at multiple state agencies and higher ed institutions. And Mr. Chairman, I do want to mention there will also be a discussion of a number of language amendments in the Capital Outlay Subcommittee on Thursday at 8 a.m. if others are interested in hearing more detail. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, very good. Questions, Rachel? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Adam?
So thank you. So moving on to general government, beginning with administration and the compensation board, $3.9 million. Oh, sorry about that. $3.9 million general fund is provided in the second year for career development programs to reflect all of the currently qualified constitutional officers who are eligible to participate. You can see all the funding amounts by category there, the largest amount of which is for the sheriffs. There's also the restoration of the $8.7 million general fund for the second year for salary compression for sheriffs. And funding for both initiatives was included in Chapter 780. And the career development funding actually represents an increase of about $400,000 over Chapter 780 to reflect all of the new number of constitutional officers that are eligible to participate. So moving on to elections, net of reductions and increases, there's about a net $4 million increase general fund. And you can see the amounts there for the different proposed items. To touch on some of the larger ones, looking at the enhancements to the bureau system, there's $1.2 million to improve functionality and local accessibility with the bureau system. There's also $2.3 million for the continuation of HAVA grant funding. This is the federal grant that was provided in, I believe, 2003, which is estimated to be fully depleted in FY18, which would then require $2.3 million in general funds to make up for the lack of the HAVA funding for the rest of the year. And then looking forward in subsequent years, that funding amount could be $6 million or more per year to fully fund the continuation of those HAVA activities. Looking at Department of General Services, there are net reductions totaling $2.3 million general fund over the biennium through a variety of targeted reductions and moving some general funded items to non-general fund sources where applicable. So moving on to DHRM, there is the removal of $1.9 million general fund the second year to establish the PEMA system as an internal service fund. So you'd see a roughly $935,000 general fund transfer or appropriation within central accounts to reflect the agency's share of costs related to the PEMA system. There's also the proposed elimination of 3 FTEs that currently administer obsolete software that's planned to be decommissioned, as well as the addition of 3 additional positions to administer the PEMA system, whose costs would be recovered through these ISF charges. There's also $8.8 million non-general fund to reflect the transfer of administrative responsibility for the LODA health benefits portion of LODA from Department of Accounts to DHRM, and so there's a corresponding move within DOH show that transfer as well. There are also 2 positions in a separate amendment to in the second year to help administer the LODA health benefits program. So now looking at state employee health insurance. So something that is normally seen in the budget is typically reflected are the changes to premium rates. That wasn't included this year as the total estimated cost, which was about $9.9 million in the second year. General fund was fully absorbed by the health insurance fund. So while they currently has balance sufficient to absorb this increase, there's an issue when looking at subsequent years from a structural balance perspective. So this is because the cost of the increase was paid for using one-time sources and not embedded in the premium. So given that, the following year's FY19 increase will also need to include not only this 10.5% increase, but also the projected increase, whatever that may be for FY19. So that's going to leave a pretty big gap there when we're looking at healthcare rates next year. So it's just something to keep in mind. So moving on to finance. Within Department of Accounts, there's $52 million for working capital advance for replacement of the SIP system. And this reflects the total estimated cost of replacing the SIP system. And it's a $27 million increase over Chapter 780, again, to reflect that total estimated cost of replacement. And there's also, as was in Chapter 780, $10 million for any unforeseen costs related to the carbon rollout. Looking at transfer payments, there's the other side of that LOTA transfer. So $9.5 million non-general fund is transferred to DHRM and VRS for their respective share in accepting that administrative responsibility for LOTA pursuant to Chapter 677, which again is that LOTA bill that was passed last year. There's also the authorization of the withdrawal from the rainy day fund and deposit to the general fund. Withdrawal amounts again specified at $294.7 million in the first year and $272.5 million in the second year. And those again represent one-half of the anticipated budget shortfall. So looking at the DPB, there's $110,000 general fund the second year to continue the Council on Virginia's Future contracts a contract that facilitates the Virginia Performance Report and Scorecard. So the council is set to sunset on July 1st, 2017, but will functionally still exist within DPP. Looking at tax, there's a reduction of $2.5 million general fund the first year and $1.5 the second year through a variety of targeted reductions, as well as shifting some general fund to non-general fund sources. There's also language with respect to the tax amnesty program, language that authorizes the use of revenue generated by the program to cover costs incurred for administering the program and provides a treasury loan of up to $5.5 million until the program begins to generate revenue. So looking at Treasury, within Treasury, there was a net $393,000 general fund reduction over the biennium. And those changes are depicted in that table. Looking at debt service, there's a reduction in debt service cost to $12.8 million general fund the first year, and $1 the second year due to the refunding of debt. Moving on to central accounts. So there were savings of $69.2 million general fund the first year and $121.1 the second year, and this reflects the removal of all of the pay actions that were included within central accounts that were in Chapter 780. There's also the $111.5 million for again, the proposed 1.5% bonus that would be distributed December 1st, 2017, and then the restoration of all those targeted initiatives of $19.1 million. And again, there are amendments throughout the budget within compensation board, judicial, and direct aid that reflect that full $111.5 million for the bonus, as well as the targeted initiatives. And this slide just shows the second year funding amounts for the compensation actions that were in Chapter 780 versus the proposed budget. Again, on the left-hand side, you see that was the 3% raise for state employees and faculty and a 2% raise for state-supported local employees and teachers. That was the full annualized cost there, as well as below that, the targeted initiatives. On the right-hand column, you can see there that the 1.5% bonus and the funding amounts for each category of employee, and then the total amounts for the target initiatives, totaling about $131 million. Looking at some other actions in central accounts, April spoke to this, the higher end interest and credit card rebate reduction in each year, $4 million. There's $2.2 million in the second year for the inauguration and agency costs related to the transition for statewide elected officials. Some technical costs related to ISF rate changes totaling $3.5 million over the biennium. There's also the $4 million reduction to ANOVA in the first year. There's also a proposed government training and succession planning program, $1.2 million general fund in the second year. And then $4 million over the biennium to reflect some regulatory changes, primarily the Fair Labor Standards Act, white collar worker, overtime pay exemption rule change, which is currently, been temporarily halted due to a federal injunction, and the likelihood of that proceeding is questionable. And there's also $1.2 million a second year for outside counsel for potential litigation. Moving on to independent agencies, within the Virginia College Savings Plan, the SOAR program, there's an increase of $1 million non-general fund, which would increase their full authorization to $2 million. There's also language that requires the prepaid fund have an actuarial value of at least 100% of the funds used for the SOAR program. In addition, language specifies that Virginia 529's operating revenue must have less than a 70% operating expense to operating revenue ratio in the prior fiscal year, unless otherwise authorized by the governor. Looking at VRS, there's $464,000 NGF over the biennium to reflect the implementation of those loaded administrative responsibilities that they assumed. Okay, so this slide depicts the capturing of higher ed's and other agencies' non-general fund share of the expedited repayment of the VRS deferral of $172.7 million. And so with higher ed institutions, that's $24.2 million the first year and $16.1 million the second year. Within other agencies, that's $12.2 and $3.6 in the first and second years, respectively. Okay, so unfortunately, Dick isn't able to be here. Well, actually, do you have any questions?
Okay.
On general government?
All right, questions is under general government, to address to Adam or to Senator Vogel, who chairs that subcommittee. Got that under control. Hearing none, Senator McDougal, chair of public safety, they got off to a good start already. Had 2 meetings before we started the session. Dick Hickman is one of our senior staff members, chairs that. He got ill over the weekend and made it home. It was probably a good call. So Adam, you going to share with us what
I will do my best, sir.
Okay, all right.
All right, so starting with ABC, so total operating revenues are projected to grow by 8.7% over 2 years, which reflects population growth, the opening of new stores, Sunday sales, and also people acquiring taste for more expensive brands. Looking at net profits and the transfer to the general fund, these are projected to increase by 2.8% over the biennium. This is reflected as increases of $13 million and $11.6 million general fund in the first and second years, respectively. There are also 25 positions added to address workforce shortages, and this is due primarily to the 29-hour rule. And April spoke to this already. There's also the roughly $105 million bond financing authorization, again, for a warehouse and administrative offices for ABC. So moving on to Department of Corrections, there are reductions of $16.6 million general fund the first year due to the delayed opening of Culpeper, vacancy savings, and other variety of other targeted reductions. The second year, $21.7 million general fund due to the delaying of Culpeper. Looking at inmate medical costs, you see increases of $11.4 million general fund the first year and $7.2 million general fund the second year. This is due primarily from off-site inpatient and outpatient services, specifically more inpatient care with more serious health issues resulting in higher costs. And that is net, the total cost is net of the elimination of the $4 million payment to VCU Health. Within DCJS, there's a $4.2 million general fund increase in 2 positions the second year for additional grants to local and regional jails for mental health screening and assessment. Chapter 780 included $3.5 million for grants for up to 6 jails to improve mental health services in jail and jail diversion programs. And some jails have already received grants as of January 1, 2017, and those are listed there on the slide. So looking at state police, their reductions totaling $6.8 million general fund the first year through general fund and non-general fund supplanting, deferring 2 positions for the new River Valley area office, and the deferral of the FTEs associated with the Special Operations Division, which would have totaled 20 FTEs over the biennium. Looking at the state agency's radio system, or STARS, there's a $600,000 general fund increase the first year and $3.4 million non-general fund the second year from unobligated bond balances. This is to perform high priority type improvements to the STARS system. So the bond balances are going to be used for replacement of power plants, software, and 200 mobile data terminals for use in patrol cars. So now looking at the proposed VITA separation, there's $5.9 million general fund and 16 positions the second year included to support the separation. This is in addition to the $7.6 million general fund in the base budget for VITA. So the separation is also expected to increase rates paid by other executive branch agencies collectively by about $3.6 million. So the new funding for this, plus the base, less the stranded costs absorbed by other executive branch agencies, results in a net cost of about $9.9 million for state police for separation. And it's been, the agency has indicated that they have sufficient funding for FY18, but would need additional funding in the next biennium. So moving on to state police compensation. So in addition to the 1.5% bonus that all employees would be awarded effective December 1st of 2017, they also received the $4 million that was in Chapter 780 in the second year for salary compression. And there's also language that specifies that it requires that they have 3 years of service. It's for both sworn and non-sworn employees. Any given percentage increase for an employee cannot exceed 7%, and a copy of a salary compression plan must be delivered to the chairman of the Senate Finance and House Appropriation Committees prior to implementation or allocation of those funds. And again, Chapter 780 provided additional money in the first year. That money wasn't restored, just the second year funding. And quickly going overview veteran services. There's $600,000 general fund and 34 positions added the second year to recognize the reorganization of the Virginia Veteran and Family Support Program. There was a 2015 jailer report which reviewed the program, and language was added last year that directed a working group to review BVFS rather. Language specified that the first year funding was contingent upon the working group's request. The introduced budget includes $700,000 general fund in the 34 positions the second year to implement one of the options, which converts all of the 34 positions currently working for 11 CSBs into state DVS employees effective FY18 with the objective of providing better and more consistent services to clients. And that concludes my portion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, other questions for Adam, public safety? Thank you. All right, Charles, you're going to introduce us to the initiatives under economic development?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Overall, in the area of commerce and trade, the governor's proposed amendments include net general fund reductions of $36.5 million over the biennium. The largest reductions include general fund decreases of $19 million from delaying certain performance grant payments and $15 million general fund decrease in funding for Go Virginia, both of which I'll talk just a bit more about in a moment. Other significant cuts include a $1.8 million general fund decrease in the Enterprise Zone Grant Program and a $1.5 million decrease in support for the Brownfields Restoration and Economic Redevelopment Assistance Fund. Major new spending items include $6 million from the general fund for an incentive grant payment under the Advanced Shipbuilding Production Grant Program, 1.5 million general fund, and 15 positions in the Department of Labor and Industry, and 1.1 million is also proposed from the general fund to create a solar development incentive program in the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energies. It's not on the slide, but with respect to the Department of Labor and Industry positions, 6 of those would be in the Virginia Occupational Safety and Health Program. 3 positions are proposed in the Virginia Voluntary Protection Program, and 6 positions are proposed in the Consultation Services Program. And spending for these positions is expected to be partially offset by higher revenues from federally mandated increases in civil penalties for occupational safety violations. Also noteworthy is the transfer of resources from the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, and as well as new funding to create the Virginia International Trade Corporation, which I'll talk about in more detail shortly. An economic development incentive payment holding account, which includes funding for discretionary business incentives such as the Commonwealth's Opportunity Fund and others, there are net general fund reductions of $13 million. The only net increase over the 2 years is in the addition of $6 million from the general fund, which is proposed to fund the first incentive grant payment under the Advanced Shipbuilding Production Facility Grant. This program, you'll recall, was authorized during the 2016 session and incentivizes the construction and operation of a new facility related to the production of nuclear vessels and submarines for the U.S. Navy. Included are $6.8 million in general fund reductions to reflect revised payment schedules in the VIP and VDIC grant programs. $4.6 million is also appropriated from non-general fund cash balances for payments that did not occur as scheduled. These are dollars that were previously appropriated from the general fund and deposited into their respective grant funds but weren't paid out because the grantees had not met certain performance milestones. Likewise, there's a reduction of $12.2 million general fund for the Rolls-Royce Aerospace Engine Facility incentive payments, and a $15.2 million non-general fund appropriation, also from cash balances in the fund for payments that are expected in FY18. There are significant reductions in funding for the Go Virginia initiative that total $15 million over the 2 years. First, funding for capacity building and regional gap analysis is reduced from $5.5 million in FY17 to $900,000 general fund, or $100,000 per each of the 9 regions in the first year. It's reduced from $3.5 million in FY18 to $1,350,000 general fund in the second year. Language also exempts these grants from the local match requirement in the first year. The per capita regional grant funding portion is reduced in the second year, also from $12.2 million to $6.1 million, and competitive grant funding, which is the third bucket, is reduced in the second year from $14.3 million to $12.2 million general fund. There are a number of adjustments related to the Virginia Economic Development Partnership. First, there is a transfer of $6.2 million in FY 2018 from VEDP to the newly created International Trade Corporation. This represents 19 positions and the funding associated with the International Trade Division within VEDP. In addition, the budget proposes to transfer $150,000 general funds in one position from the Office of the Secretary of Commerce and Trade, as well as $817,000 general fund in new spending and 5 new positions to fulfill administrative functions in the new agency. New funding is also proposed in the amount of just over $168,000 general fund in the second year to support hiring an internal auditor. This would be on the recommendation of the Joint Legislative Audit Review Commission. And there is a reduction in support for the Brownfields Restoration Fund from $2.25 million general fund each year to $2 million in the first year, and just under $948,000 general fund in the second year. There are a number of other smaller reductions, which I won't go into detail on, but they total $1.9 million over the 2 years. In the Virginia Tourism Authority, there are reductions to marketing and advertising, which total $500,000 general fund the first year, $1.3 million general fund the second year, as well as reductions totaling just under $450,000 for sponsorship activities over the 2 years. And there's a 50% decrease in funding for the See Virginia First program. There's also new spending proposed in the second year, which totals $400,000. This would be the first of 3 payments and a 3-year contract for an Asian market tourism promotion campaign, which is designed to promote travel from India to Virginia. There are a number of other noteworthy actions in the Department of Center, Commerce and Trade. I'll just highlight a few of these. In the Department of Housing and Community Development, there's a $15 million non-general fund appropriation. This comes from the $120 million National Disaster Resilience Competition Federal Grant Award, intended to support investments to protect communities in the Hampton Roads region from the effects of recurrent flooding. The governor's amendments reduce or completely eliminate funding, which totals just over $925,000 general fund for the integrated test facility at Center for Advanced Engineering and Research. Also in DHCD, there's a reduction in the first year for funding for the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative. That cut totals $250,000 general fund. The governor's budget proposes a reduction of about $1.2 million to the Small Business Jobs Grant Fund. There's also a non-general fund appropriation of just under $630,000 from balances in the fund that were previously appropriated from the general fund to meet grant commitments in FY18. There's also a general fund reduction of $230,000 to the Small Business Investment Grant Fund. Now, both of these are administered by the Department of Small Business and Supplier Diversity, and there's also personnel savings in that department, which total $287,209 over the 2 years, which is on this slide. The budget proposes savings of just over $690,000 general fund in the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy, and also proposes to transfer the non-general fund cash balances from the Biofuels Production Fund to the general fund. This is a program that is repealed effective at the end of this fiscal year, and no additional payments are expected. Also noteworthy are reductions totaling $539,000 general fund to the Fort Monroe Authority, and savings of $200,000 in 17 from delaying full implementation of the Registered Apprenticeship Incentive Program in the Department of Labor and Industry. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my very brief summary. I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay. Any questions, Charles? All right. Thank you, Charles. Hearing none, we'll move on to Ag Business Services. Jason?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving forward into Ag and Forestry, the net total reductions for the Secretary total $1.6 million in the first year and $3.6 in the second. Starting with the Department of Forestry, there is an initiative to propose a new silvicultural fee for inspections provided to landowners and logging operators. That's $100 per job site. It offsets a reduction of $500,000 from the Department of Forestry. Those services are currently provided free to landowners at no charge. There's an authorization to sell 5 forestry tracts located across the state to backfill a reduction of about $340,000. A proposal to reduce the general fund match for the reforestation of timberlands program by $300,000, and $800,000 in savings by delaying and deferring new hires and the elimination of 4 positions. Over at the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, Mike mentioned previously a restaurant inspection fee. This is the non-restaurant inspection fee component of that. It's currently a fixed $40 fee. The proposal is to change that to a variable fee ranging from $40 to $375, generating approximately $400,000 to backfill a cuttable-like amount. Other notable reductions at the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services include a $500,000 reduction in the first year and $750,000 for the purchase of development rights, land farmland preservation program, about $220,000 in each year for the Agriculture and Forestry Industries Development Incentive Fund, as well as the elimination of a position in support of that program, elimination of the state side funding for the Coyote and Vulture Control Program, sweeping the balances and eliminating new funding for the Beehive Grant Program, eliminating the Specialty Crop Commercialization Program, and reducing domestic and international marketing by $175,000 in the first year and $250,000 in the second year. The Natural Resources side of the house, the proposed amendments to Natural Resource Secretariat reduces spending by about $2.1 million in the first year and $7.4 million in the second year, or about 6.4%. The majority of the second year savings come from reductions in land acquisition programs managed by the Department of Conservation and Recreation and Department of Historic Resources. Those total $3.8 million in reductions. There are several smaller reductions throughout the Secretariat offset by supplanting federal funds, transferring program balances, or increasing fees. The Governor's introduced budget proposes to modify the 2016 prohibition on the acquisition of parklands to allow specifically for inholdings and other lands contiguous to state parks done with non-general fund appropriations. And in capital outlay, there's an authorization for $1 million in fiscal year 18 and $2.3 million in fiscal year 18 for parks and 2.3 for natural area preserves. The October reduction plan for natural resources totaled $1 million. The bulk of that came from eliminating one-time funding for the construction of handicap accessible mountain bike trail at Pocahontas State Park, as well as the elimination of 4 positions. The Department of Environmental Quality, the Governor proposes 3 actions to supplant dedicated program funding and revert balances to offset general fund reductions. The first is transfer of $1 million from the Vehicle Inspection Fund. Next is a $1.6 million transfer from the Waste Tire Fund, and the third is a $500,000 from the Hazardous Waste Management Fund. There are also 2 policy proposals embedded within the language for environmental quality. The first would remove the prioritization for nutrient offsets for animal waste to energy programs or projects, and to add stationary source air pollution to those programs that are eligible for funding from the Virginia Environmental Response Fund. At the Marine Resources Commission, there is a proposal to end the Virginia saltwater sport fishing tournament, saving about $200,000 a year. I would venture you would see some amendments to restore that. There are amendments to reflect savings from an increase of about $200,000 non-general fund from commercial fishing license fees that were increased by the commission in December. Those fees are capped at $5. The increase is capped at $5 over the rate of inflation since the last increase. And there is a spending proposal to restore $400,000 general fund for habitat management, which was a cut that was taken in 2010. The office is ill-equipped to handle the number of permit applications that it presently has coming through the door, about 2,000 permits. In historic resources, there is a small new general fund spending proposal to approximately $35,000 that allows for the preservation of historical African-American grave sites and cemeteries, consistent with the approach that we take towards maintaining Revolutionary War and Civil War grave sites. And at the Museum of Natural History, there are savings reductions totaling $300,000, primarily from delaying hiring, reducing hours, and eliminating 2 positions. Turning to the Secretariat of Technology, there is a proposal for the Secretariat. The introduced budget increases in the first year general fund spending by $1.8 million, which is one spending action offset by a series of smaller reductions, and a net reduction of $2.2 million in the general fund in the second year. The non-general fund appropriations are reduced by $3.4 million in the first year and $11.9 million in the second year, largely reflecting consumption patterns of contract IT services. I would note that the first year increased spending in general fund is $2.3 million to retire an outstanding debt that was for a program known as the Virginia Enterprise Applications Program. It had a line of credit that was supposed to be repaid from enhanced tax collections. Those tax collections haven't materialized, so it's carried as a debt on the books of the Commonwealth. Over at the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Investment Authority, Their reductions total $400,000 in the first year and $100,000 in the second year. The first year reductions are largely from dedicated program balances from the Growth Accelerator Program, the Commonwealth Research and Commercialization Fund. The reduction in the second year reflects overhead savings from reduction in force that has taken place at the agency over the past year. Turning to VITA, non-general fund savings are generated primarily from, as I said, reduced consumption of vendor services based on both the actual and forecast use for fiscal year 18. Those largest two areas are reduced utilization of general partnership services totaling $7.8 million and reduced Medicaid IT services totaling $5.3 million. Related to the transition from partnership, transition-related actions result in savings of approximately $7 million over the biennium and a reduction of 12 FTE due to a changing in the timeline for disentanglement. And new spending totaling approximately $1 million non-general fund is proposed for management of cloud-based services and the expansion of the bandwidth capacity here on Capitol Square. As Adam mentioned in state police, there is an initiative that provides additional general funding of approximately $6 million and 16 FTE for state police to fully come out of VITA services. There's language within VITA that would allow for them to recover any costs that would be stranded with other executive branch agencies directly from state police, because of the way the funding model works is as the net number of resources goes up, the cost to the others remaining in would increase to meet the contractual obligations. Turning to Secretary of Transportation, there are no general fund changes within transportation. Those are largely debt service and payments in lieu of taxes. However, there is an increase of $136.2 million, or 2% in the first year from transportation fund forecasts, and a slight reduction of $37.6 million in the second year. At VDOT and the Department of Rail and Public Transportation, their amendments are primarily technical in nature to reflect those changes to the Commonwealth Transportation Fund forecast. And there's also a proposal to increase staffing levels at both VDOT and DRPT. At DRPT, the proposal was for 6 additional full-time equivalents associated with the management of the Atlantic Gateway project. It directs that they would be paid from doubling the retained overhead percentage on passenger rail program funding. And at VDOT, it's an additional 10 proposals for additional 10 full-time positions for state-operated toll facilities, including I-66 and South Development. At the Department of Motor Vehicles, there is a proposal to eliminate the direct non-general fund appropriation for the administration of the Easy Pass program. The way that the program will be funded in this proposal is to allow DMV to charge VDOT chargeback program for the management they provide of the Easy Pass program, as well as providing those transponders from the customer service centers. There is language to provide an affirmative authorization for DMV to pass along indirect costs. And there's a statewide indirect cost allocation plan to agencies where DMV collects revenues on their behalf. Most affected agencies under that policy would be VDOT, Department of Health, and Department of State Police. There are 2 transportation capital projects. One of them is a language authorizing additional DMV customer service center in Loudon, and the other is a VDOT Hampton Roads District headquarters, allowing VDOT to sell or convey up to 88.43 acres in Suffolk, allowing them to retain the proceeds for acquisition and construction of a new district headquarters, and anything that remains would be positive to the TTF as opposed to the general fund. Based on some initial research, it seems like that parcels were purchased in the 40s. I don't know if they were dedicated TTF dollars or not at that point. Still researching. If there are no questions.
Questions? Jason? Okay, that completes around the presentations on the introduced budget. Betsy, do you have anything additional to share? Thanks, staff, for their work, and certainly the work over the past week and all the member amendments that were assembled together. They worked all weekend to do that. And on that, Betsy, when will we have those on our desk?
Today, no, let's see. Let's see, your LAs, and you should be getting them on your desk today.
Okay. All right, so we'll be looking for
And you have until 5 p.m. to give us any changes, corrections,